Hello, can you hear me? In Ireland?
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you again. You hear us?
Yes, just hold on 1 minute. 1 minute.
We will.
Okay, first of all, let me say thank you to Phil. It was a great job. There's a lot of information that passed through about what you have to do and the coalitions you have to build. That's serious stuff. You can't get it done without the type of work that they put forth. You just can't walk in the courtroom and say, here I am. And the mine workers have done some excellent work under President Roberts. And I want you to extend to President Roberts my deep appreciation of the Alliance for all the work that he's done. He's an executive board member. We appreciate he's always ready to step up. As when he volunteered you, he said, it will happen. So we appreciate him, and we'll certainly be communicating with him. We're going to try this, we're going to try the Skype. We think we got the problem fixed. We're going to go back to the Skype print presentation and see how it works.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll hand you over to Denis Gormalley. Denis will try and take you through. I don't know how much you saw from the first time, but he's going to go through it from the beginning again. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, John. So, I will be defined benefit pension schemes. Defined benefit pensions are schemes where the benefit a member will receive in retirement is predefined in relation to his or her salary and length of service in the scheme. Under Irish trust law, the pension scheme fund is held separately and ran independent of the company. Defined benefit pension schemes pre-2008. Before the economic crisis in 2008, defined benefit pension schemes in Ireland were already under significant pressure to meet the regulatory standards, the minimum funding standard. This was mainly caused by increased life expectancy, but also related to poor returns from volatile equity markets and poor returns from government bonds. These are the dominant areas of investment for pension schemes. In 2008, the pension regulator suspended the minimum funding standard, a move that was welcomed by all stakeholders. It appeared as if a breathing space was being given so that steps could be taken to ease the pressure on sustainable schemes. It gradually became apparent that officialdom had no intention of dealing with the systemic problem. Rather, it adopted a position that the problems were a matter for individual schemes and the trustees of those schemes. As trustees grappled with mounting problems, they were left in the dark for nearly 5 years. In this period, we saw dramatic losses in equity markets, rising costs in AAA government bonds, which caused a huge decreases in assets of schemes, while increasing life expectancy and spiralling costs of annuities dramatically increased the liabilities of schemes. A perfect storm was completed as the government of the time then increased the regulatory standard when schemes could least afford it. This perfect storm resulted in the following issues in defined benefit schemes. Acceleration in scheme wind-ups, with approximately 25% wound up by the end of 2013. Most schemes are closed to new members. A growing number of schemes are closed to future service accrual. Most schemes are not meeting the minimum funding standard. Many were saved by Section 50 applications, which is a legal mechanism to fund schemes in deficit in a period up to 10 years. But this involved major losses of pension benefits that workers have earned and paid for. This contributed to a crisis of confidence for workers in pension schemes. Almost all solutions involved no further increases to pensions in payment. People can expect to slowly descend into poverty from the moment they retire. If high inflation returns, the fall into poverty will be rapid. The increased liability of schemes are mainly caused by the cost of annuities. There are two major elements driving this increase. Firstly, the increase in life expectancy, and secondly, Annuities were underwritten by German government bonds with historically low yields, as most other European government bonds had lost their AAA status and could not be used. SIPTU's industrial response to the crisis. Within the SIPTU manufacturing division, we found that our organisers were very isolated when a crisis would hit a scheme. In this situation, the organiser would meet with the company, accompanied with our shop stewards, and meet a management team armed with hired professionals from the pensions industry. We believe that this situation put our organisers, and therefore our members, at a disadvantage and on the back foot in attempting to negotiate the best outcome for our members. It was decided that we would set up a divisional pensions group, including the industrial organiser, assistant assigned to the particular employment where the pension issue arose, the sector organiser concerned with the divisional organiser, and at least one more organiser with experience in dealing with pensions issues. We also put a protocol in place to be followed by organisers once a major problem became apparent. The appropriate industrial organiser would contact his or her sector organiser, and the following procedure would then occur. A consultative meeting would be arranged involving the divisional pensions group. This group will evaluate the issues concerned and decide how best the matter should be dealt with and what resources are needed to assist the industrial organiser. 2, a key priority is that the legal documents and rules of the scheme are analysed at this stage by at least 2 of the divisional pensions group, and that these documents have been read, properly understood and interpreted. 3, this group can meet as required, and the industrial organiser shall be responsible for the prosecution of the dispute and any negotiations. Further assistance shall be at the request of the industrial organiser. Our experience has been that we have found the use of the protocol great benefit to the union and its members, as we have pooled our knowledge and understanding to the various schemes that have gotten to difficulty. More importantly, through the processes of this protocol, we have learned more in the 4 years since its inception than we did in the previous 20 years, as the expertise of the group has developed with every new situation, and this expertise is then shared with all organisers within the division and indeed the union. Examples of our learning were, firstly, that we could demand of employers that they would pay for an actuary to advise the union negotiating team, as we had found that employers would employ actuaries to advise themselves. This proved to be an important initiative, as we found that negotiating teams were much better prepared and informed prior to negotiations commencing, and could then deliver more effective outcomes for our members. Secondly, we found that there was a lack of understanding generally within our membership in relation to pensions, and that this lack of understanding resulted in our members potentially making poor decisions that would affect their pension. We undertook to develop and publish a pensions booklet for our shop stewards that explained pensions in a user-friendly language and presents the pensions landscape in as practical terms as possible. Because, as we all know, pensions are commonly presented as the most complex subject on earth. This initiative has proved very successful, as our shop stewards have given positive feedback that they have found these booklets very useful in both explaining pensions-related issues to our members and in discussions or negotiations with employers. Finally, we have grown our expertise in the relatively new phenomenon of enhanced transfer values for both active and deferred members. This is normally done on a voluntary basis, with the individual receiving independent financial advice. It is significant in that employers can invest in de-risking the scheme and enhancing the member's pension, rather than investing in supporting an unsustainable scheme.
Thank you very much, Dennis. And if you have any questions, you can come back to us later. I'm going to hand you over to Teresa now. Teresa's going to go through the defined contribution scheme. Teresa.
Thank you, John. Dennis, and I would represent workers in the private sector, primarily in the services and manufacturing industries. And the pension schemes that Den's talking about and I was talking about are employer-specific occupational pension schemes. They're not industry-specific, but employer-specific. Denis has outlined our strategy and what we have done in the past and are continuing to do to educate ourselves and our members about looking after defined pension schemes, defined benefit pension schemes. But what usually happens if we have a wind-up of a defined benefit pension scheme or closure to new members or closure to future accrual, we are left with the correlation of pension defined contribution pension scheme. The defined pension contribution pension schemes in Ireland probably are the same as universal. They have a set contribution for both the employee and the employer. In Ireland, they're mainly equalisation schemes. That is, both the employer and employee contribution is the same, and the majority are about 5% each, which would mean a 10% contribution by both parties. These contributions are invested on behalf of each scheme member. The retirement benefit for each member depends on how much money goes into the scheme and is being built up by retirement. So it's not possible to know in advance what the pension benefits a member will receive. The contribution rates are fixed in advance, and their employers know they have to commit it to. But the member does not normally know until very close to retirement what their pot or their pension fund will be to enable what their benefits will be. The higher the investment return achieved by the scheme before retirement, the better the pension benefits will be. On the other hand, if investment returns are poor, especially in the years just before retirement, retirement benefits will be lower than expected. In the DC scheme, the members build up a fund by retirement age which is used to buy a retirement pension. The cost of the pension is unknown in advance, and it is up to the members' advantage if the cost is low, but detrimental if the pension cost of retirement is high. The members' earnings increase rapidly throughout their working life. Their DC benefits may be low relative to their earnings just before retirement. Contributions are usually allocated uniformly across all members as a percentage of pensionable earnings. There is no discrimination between those who stay until retirement and those who leave early. And they are all the things we're getting to know about defined contribution schemes, but we're also going to find that there's major issues with a defined contribution scheme. The main current issue with DC schemes is the adequacy of the pension benefit payable on retirement. The majority of public and private defined benefit schemes will provide benefits that are adequate for those with long service. However, because of inadequate contribution levels during people's working life, the majority of the DC scheme members are unlikely to have adequate retirement income. The member bears the risk, as opposed to a defined benefit scheme where the employer would bear the risk if the investment is not as good as expected, and therefore has to deal with paying higher costs or receiving reduced benefits. The Irish private sector spending on pensions is among the lowest in Europe, according to the Organiser for Economic Cooperation and Development. In the sectors we represent, then I would represent, over 60% of Irish workers have no occupational pension, and they will rely solely on state pension or what you would call social security pension when they retire. The full state pension requires 40 years of contributions at about €233 a week, which is probably about $250 per week. And currently, from last year's earnings, about 44% of the average weekly earnings of workers in Ireland. So you can see the problem people are going to have when they retire. There's going to be this huge problem because they won't have enough money coming in from their pension to keep them going in their retirement age. And especially in some of the workers we represent, precarious or low-paid work, they cannot afford to contribute to an occupational or even to have a private pension scheme. Because we have no legislation in Ireland that forces an employer to have a pension scheme, that is why we have so many people that are not in a pension scheme. So our priority now is to try and educate our members about the necessity to have a pension, whether it be a defined pension scheme or a defined benefit pension scheme or defined contribution pension scheme, is to stave off the inevitability we're going to face as a country in 20 or 30 years' time, where we'll have workers who have worked 43 years and will be relying on a state pension of €1,000 a week, which will probably be less than a quarter of their earnings when they were working.
Thank you very much, Teresa. I'm just going to give John McCarrick here now. I'm going to give a quick one down on the public sector and the public sector pension scheme that exists there. That scheme would be designed to give an employee or worker 50% of their pre-retirement earnings through a combination of the old age contributory pension that Teresa has so eloquently outlined to you there at €233 per week. This would be through a combination of both. Now, the public sector scheme is very different to the rest of the schemes that have been spoken of because they're unfunded. The scheme means that, while employees pay to have deductions taken from their wages, it doesn't go anywhere, it just goes back into the fund, into the national treasury, and there's no fund for the schemes, which means that the payment for pensioners must come out of the first contribution. The first thing that an employer has to do in the beginning of the year when they get their money, if they're a health board or a HSE, they have to take money aside for pensions. And I'll be able to show you in a slide later on how much that costs and what the cost of the public service pension there. So the background to this is the economy collapsed in 2008. The private pensions that both Denis and Teresa have spoken about went through the floor. So the equities were gone. So the public servants who were continued to enjoy a proper pension scheme were targeted. They were targeted by everybody. They were targeted by IBEC. They were targeted by the government. They were targeted by everybody. So the government went on an austerity program. They brought in the financial emergency measures in the public interest legislation, which gave them the authority to cut people's wages. So they cut wages of public servants, which had a knock-on effect of cutting their pension. Now, the government then subsequently reached an agreement with the unions in around 2010 after many years of marching and protests, and we had what we call the Crow Park Agreement, which is just named so because that's where it was negotiated. Some of you might be familiar with the Gaelic games that are played in Crow Park. But the agreement protected the workers' pensions, but there was a price to pay for that protection. There was a pension levy imposed, the pay cuts, as I said, were imposed earlier, and there was a new pension for the future. The old pension, which all of these public servants enjoyed, was to change in the future. Now, in explaining the reasons for the cuts in the public service pensions, the government plan says that the pensions now account for 15% of the total public service pay and pension bill, having increased from 1.35 billion in 2005 to 2.8 billion in 2010. Now, some of the reason for that increase would have been the fact that a lot of people were encouraged to retire from the public service. So the public service pay bill increased, or the pension bill in the public service increased dramatically at that time. So, budget 2010, the government decided to introduce this new single pension scheme for all new entrants to the public service. Now, consultations on the new scheme had started, and it was agreed that these consultations would conclude in time for legislation to be enacted. So, the legislation was enacted. So, we back to where the pensions were targeted. The challenge came from everywhere. The major changes in the pensions for existing public servants was backed by what Teresa told you about the Organiser of Economic and Cooperation and Development, the OECD. They said that they make it in a report to the Commission of Government with the prospect of either a career average or defined contribution pension for future service at all, or at least some existing public service on the agenda. So eventually in 2013, there was a new career average pension scheme negotiated, and it was based on the index-linked average of salaries throughout one's career rather than final salary. The current scheme for the people before that, it was their final salary. They were expected to get half of that through a combination of the old age contributory pension and their pension from work. Or there was other people who were just getting a 50% pension from work. But this new scheme now from January 2013, it's going to reduce the bill to the government by at least 30% in the cost of pensions under the new scheme. There will be, those with fewer promotions and shorter increment scales will be less affected than others. IBEC, the Irish Employers Lobby Group, they stated that as part of the government's effort to reduce public expenditure the cost and liability to the taxpayer of public service pensions must be reduced. This is again the background of which we were actually still fighting. IBEC were continuing during all the negotiations on new schemes. What they call the six-star scheme had to be ended. So the IBEC had lost their own pension scheme during the crisis. IBEC are the Employers and Business Confederation. They're an employer representation and lobby group. They lost their own pension scheme during the collapse, but instead of campaigning for the protection of pension schemes, all they did was attack the public service scheme, which resulted in that attack and that reduction to a new scheme now where people are on. It's a career average. So if you have 40-year service, if you started earning 5,000, 50,000 a year, and you ended up earning 100,000, your average may come down to 65, 75,000. So instead of getting the pension based on what you're earning at the end, you get a career average pension. So in conclusion, the collapse has serious implications for the public service, pay and pension. The unions fought a difficult campaign against the tide of employers and private sector employees, because there were private sector employees who felt that the employers in the public service were being cosseted and were being minded and were getting something that they would never get. And Denis has outlined here the efforts we've made to educate them and to let them know that everybody is entitled to a pension and that we should all have one, but they were attacking the public service time. So while existing pensions were protected, then we still ended up with new entrants being forced to accept an inferior pension. The fight to change this unequal treatment has begun, but we're very unlikely that it will succeed in the long term. So that's the outcome for us, I suppose, of the difficulties faced in the pension challenge that we had. So if you have any questions for any of us, we'd be delighted to try and answer them.
Any questions? It sounds like everybody better fight for their pension. That's what it sounds like to me. There are no questions. I want to thank you for coming into us. We have about 70 people in the room who are all in the pension arena, and we thank you. We'll be back with you through SUNY to help develop further programs. So I thank you for coming in all the way from Ireland. Thank you very much.